Hello, everybody. Nobody's here, but I'm having a chat. How are you doing? I'm doing amazing, John. Just working on my wonderful heated beverage here. We have a latte. Ooh, ooh, ooh. So excited for that one. Yep. All right. So I have, as you would expect, I had a little bit of a challenge setting up today. Just before I started getting everything set up, I had an update, of course, and it was a software update, and I couldn't access my browser, and oh boy, well, it always works out that way, doesn't it? It works out that way. Yep. So today I've been getting Fernie ready for playgroup. Now was the best time ever. She loves going, and yeah. Just gonna wait for some people to join up. We're a little bit early, and that's all right. I've been doing a lot of research lately on protein and protein accessories. I tell you what, uh, just playing. I've been doing a lot of research on protein lately and how a lot of people most likely aren't getting enough protein. It's an interesting thing, really, because you would think that in a time where like all these products are high in protein, most people would be getting a reasonable amount. But what I've found is that the more unwell somebody is, the more protein they end up needing. And this is a very interesting situation because our body is not able to store protein like what we can do with other things such as fat, and everybody knows we can store some fat on our body. Well, protein can't be stored, and because it can't be stored, if there's an increased need, maybe because of some sort of tissue trauma or an increased requirement because of an enhanced metabolic activity, what happens is the body has to get that protein somehow. And if there's nothing in the stomach, in the digestive tract, it's got to get it from somewhere else. So what it does is it pulls the protein from the tissues to bring it into the blood, and you'll see some blood markers that start to reflect that as well, globulin and albumin mostly, and you can look at albumin to globulin ratio to get an idea of the degree of protein, functional protein deficiency. And anyway, this protein comes from our tissues, from our muscles, and it makes its way into the blood to go to the area that is needing a bit more protein. The thing is when people have glandular imbalances, mineral imbalances, low nutrient intake, inflammation processes are generally a bit higher than typical. And so with this, our protein requirements are a bit more higher than typical. And it can get really challenging to feed the amount of protein that our body actually needs. A lot of compensations start to occur, and it seems a bit weird where our enzyme production will go down because we need proteins to make enzymes and we need minerals to make enzymes. And as our digestive tract starts to get compromised, then we have a harder time breaking down that protein. So I'm finding it's really important to make sure that we have some liquid or at least some protein sources that are easily digested. And this, I've been using a lot of collagen for this, a lot of whey protein for this. Works beautiful, and compliance wise it's so much easier. A lot of people can just add in the protein to their something like their coffee or their warm drink in the morning, get a little bit more protein, and you can tip it in a little bit of meal each day or each little snack, and on the grand scheme of things your protein intake can go up 30 grams, and that can be pretty good. Pretty good. I'll tell you what, Bobby, I'm just gonna have a look in the group and see if anybody is around. I don't know if anyone can see what I'm doing or if I'm just talking to myself. Yeah. Who knows? Who knows? I see there's some chat. Oh, I didn't get notified where I was looking, but hey, Anna, how are you? Just talking to myself. Yeah, fun stuff. It's really interesting in my like dashboard because I'm live. It doesn't actually tell me anybody's here, so that's interesting. Hopefully it doesn't mess things up too much because I'm kind of winging it today. I don't really have a yeah, I don't really have a topic of discussion today. I just wanted to pop in and say hey and chat with some people, maybe answer some questions if anybody has some questions. That's what we're looking to do. It is really weird though. It doesn't show me when you guys are chatting. I can see it though, so if you do have a question, feel free to drop one below. I just had to open a new page for that. Hey Lou. Glad you can make it. You were a bit early yesterday, but well, we're here today. Alrighty, alrighty. So, as I was saying, I've been learning a lot about protein. I don't know if everybody else caught into that, but I was learning about protein and having nice little reads on that topic, and it's always fascinating to me. I got a nice little, this is like a coffee, but I like half did the espresso in here, so it's like a weak coffee, and I put in some chai blends of spice in here, and so I call it my wonderful Tchaikovsky. Yeah, that's what I've been playing with this one. Been enjoying that little idea. There's probably a delay on this, which I have no reference point for, so another cool thing that I've been doing, I have been looking at Melvin Page's work, and for those of you that don't know, Melvin Page is really connected to the metabolic typing community, especially a lot of Dr. David Watts's work. And Dr. David Watts had connected the calcium and phosphorus ratio on the hair tissue mineral analysis to the autonomic nervous system, and this correlation comes from Dr. David Watts's reading on Dr. Melvin Page. Dr. Melvin Page was a really cool guy. He did a lot of organ therapy and some nutrient therapy and dietary suggestions. One of the coolest things that I found was that he did something called anthropomorphic measurements. So what he would do is he would measure like your arms from the tip of your wrist bone all the way down to your elbow, and he would divide it into different areas, and then he would measure each of these locations and then average them. And what you would take that number and he would measure from your ankle up to your knee, and then he'd end up with two numbers as like averages here, and then he would do a mathematical equation together to start to chart this information so that you could put it on to see like gonad health, so like sexual organs, or pituitary function or thyroid function, and he would graph it out. And you know, I can share it with you to give you an idea. I'll show you mine, and you get this really cool image. I wouldn't get other people to do something like this. Bit challenging to do, if I'm honest, but you end up with a document a lot like this where you can see somebody's measurements and track it on a graph. And I found that I had that area on that sex hormone area that was really away from that average, and I've been exploring that idea to see if I can get new insights into hair tissue mineral analysis, because I think that's interesting, and I think we should explore some of these older folks' work, especially the ones that are core to what we do today, which is hair tissue mineral analysis and metabolic typing. So super cool. I've been exploring his work a lot, and found some pretty cool things with it. Um, his books are pretty hard to find. Nutrition and Degeneration is one of them. And there's not a whole lot of information about how he actually used some of the measurements for addressing health conditions, but it's pretty cool nonetheless. So I've been looking at a lot of Melvin Page's work and calcium to phosphorus ratio. And it also, I'm always trying to compare that with other things. One of the things that I've been doing, I compared it with the blood. And so I've been finding a lot of clients that, we find like an elevated calcium to phosphorus ratio in the blood. And that's a really common thing to see on the hair, because we see those in slow oxidizers, right? The people with the high calcium and the phosphorus at like the normal or slightly low. And it's a very ubiquitous pattern. But I also get a lot of blood tests from people. So I was having a look at the calcium. Most labs aren't even testing for phosphorus in the blood, and that makes things a little bit hard. But yeah, what can you do once you get the measurements? Oh, with Melvin Page's stuff. So the measurements, what they do is they really give us insight to how our body's glands, which are like areas of our body that secrete hormones or molecules to our body. And as we're developing, so say we're like, like the little ones up to the little 3, 4, all the way up 12, during that time our body is growing and developing. And same with our glandular health. And so as we reach our adult stage, a lot of our brain development and our glandular development is already being done. And so those glandular states can have an impact on your physical body, like the shape of your physical body. So you'll find people with like low thyroid function generally have higher body mass, for example. That's just one example. People with a lot of pituitary problems, which could be part and parcel of a thyroid condition, that can be a bit more flabby and have more fat on their body. So you can see how these glands can directly impact the physical body and how that not only looks but the shape of somebody as well. So when I did these measurements, I learned about how my glands have developed to the point when I was an adult. And I'm a short guy. I'm not very tall. I'm like the definition of a portly person, a stocky, little tiny, solid little brick. And like that would be a result of my glandular health growing up from a child, and to some degree genetics as well. My like northern English, Irish, Viking culture there. That's going to come through as well. But the glandular health as we're growing plays a enormous, effect on the way that we look, probably more than some genetic things, because it can change literally how you look. And that can make a big difference when you're an adult. Hey Rhonda, how you been? It's been a little while since I've seen your name. So yeah, these glandular things are really cool. It gives us a lot of insight on how the body currently is. And Melvin Page, to some degree, he was even open to saying like your forearm and the muscle there is impacted by hormone status, like testosterone or something, especially in males. But he was more specifically about like the bone structure than he was muscular. Muscular did play a role, but not as much with that. Now, Melvin Page's, a lot of his stuff primarily focused on being what he called like a sympathetic dominance or parasympathetic dominance. He tried to type two different people, so people that are a bit more stimulant and very go, 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 and there's other people that are a little bit more reserved and they don't seem to have that go aspect to them. And so it was the initial stages of trying to classify different types of people and what that might mean for their health clinically. Yeah, really cool stuff, Dr. Melvin Page. I think that like the biggest bane for modern health is that we don't look back at like a lot of the work that people have done, and instead we're trying to like reinvent the wheel. We see this happening a lot in mineral balancing as well, where people are still trying to explain, copper toxicity or other nuances, and hey, that's very important. But I think people are really overlooking some of the stuff from the past and where we are in the past, and how much we've already learned and covered. And it's unreal, really, a lot of the work that they've done in the past. Even in the early 1900s, it seems like after or during the war, a lot of information seemed to have disseminated away from the natural health communities and like allopathic medicine in general. So Melvin Page brought forth these calcium to phosphorus ratios that we use nowadays as, you might hear someone say metabolic typing, or I'm a fast oxidizer. They can eat anything because they burn all of the food that they eat so fast that they never put on any weight. People talk about those ideas, and it's a great concept. And being so deep in the trenches of HTMA, like, I see these things regularly of these different types or different ways that people are expressing themselves. And I think part of the challenge that come with this, and it's a thing we see still, is when people say fast or slow oxidizer, it's kind of lost some of its meaning, because originally when Dr. Eck and Dr. Paul said it, it was fast and slow. Hey Rhonda, the anthropomorphic measurements were Melvin Page, sorry, but who was a friend and close to Weston A. Price. Again, some people didn't get mentioned as time went forward. Yeah. But these, Dr. Paul Eck would say fast and slow, and it was great because there were two categories. The problem with that is that it can be more nuanced, and we're starting to see the nuance start to create some problems now. And here's a good example where we see a pattern. Someone might say, hey, that's a fast metabolizer, a fast oxidizer. And when we look at like the actual hair test, it comes through and it's like a 4-low pattern, and we know that that person is not a fast metabolizer. They're not rapidly creating energy, at least in a way that they have the energy to use. They might be rapidly creating it and it's wasted. But now that we've kind of started to bring in some of Dr. Watts's work with Melvin Page, that situation has gotten really blurry, and I think it's creating a lot of conflict where people have a lot of disagreements and fast and slow and how to address certain things. And I don't think it was a bad thing that Dr. Watts did this. He added in the 8 metabolic types, for those of you that don't know. So instead of just saying fast and slow, we also said mixed, where you're kind of fast and kind of slow, and you could be 2 ways with that. Dr. Watts said, well, look, you can be fast and you can be slow, but you can have different mineral levels along the way, and that can have different meanings as well. So I feel like Dr. Watts's work is really trying to open up the metabolic typing world instead of trying to oversimplify it. And I think that's a really good thing. But we get into these weird spots, as I was trying to say, where you get someone in 4 lows that's exhausted. They might have a lot of glandular issues or digestive issues, and they get classed as like a fast oxidizer, which is supposed to be someone with good adrenal function, and it just doesn't seem to work. So there's a bit of confusion there now because of these two camps. And of course, as you have limited data sets and especially really empowering information, you're going to often come with different conclusions of how that works with people. And I think we're in a great time now where we can start learning a bit more about these individual types and discussing them and learning more from it, rather than coming at it in like a dogmatic view. And I'm really hoping that's what we can do, with the future of mineral balancing as well. It's just to discuss these differences and how sometimes we change between different types. And, you know, maybe instead of always looking at a hair test as if there's always a problem, as if using these types as a way of progress or someone's journey along their way to find health, so they don't just like slow oxidize it with a calcium shell and then they just hope it comes down, but there's no pattern and goal to come in with that, you know. uh, Zelda is asking if someone in Fort Low is mostly low in magnesium. Um, by definition, someone in Four Lows is like low in the electrolytes in general at a tissue level. Um, so I would say yes. Four lows is often the pattern. We call it a four lows when the first four minerals, calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, they're all below ideal. When they're lower than that, you can have a lot of people's experiences in that pattern that are very different. I've worked with people that are very athletic, you know, like really high tier sports in four lows, and I've worked with people that can barely get out of bed to go make their breakfast being in four lows. So like that pattern itself, you can have a lot of different realities within that pattern. But in general, yeah, just based off the tissue level, we often say it's low. Um, yeah, absolutely. Four lows is an interesting pattern, mostly because it's becoming more important, more and more apparent that there's more nuance to it than what it seems has been kind of brought forth. You take care, Jim. Catch you later. The four low pattern is those individuals that when the fast and slow oxidation types were being developed by Dr. George Watson, which is what Dr. Pollack used to correlate with the hair tissue mineral analysis. In Dr. George Watson's books, he talks about the fast and the slow oxidizers, he calls it, and that tells us the rate that they create energy. He also talked about another type, which he called subtypes. They're people that didn't respond in one way or the other. They didn't respond like a fast or a slow metabolic types. And so he categorized them as like a third area of just saying like suboxidant. There's like something weird about them. They're kind of a mix between the two categories that he found. And they just kind of sat there in this third little wheel. And I think that's how Dr. Eck tried to bring forth these patterns and then give more ideology behind what a four lows pattern can be, at least on a hair test. I don't think it relates all the way with the oxidation types of Watson, because Watson wasn't using hair, he was using blood, and he was using breath tests as well. So he just wasn't working in the same way as Dr. Eck was. So now that we're starting to see these pattern four lows, we're starting to see some people get in and out of these patterns very easily. Other people are in here and it's like they're in there for long time. I've seen people be stuck in four lows for years. I've been in four lows for a long time over periods. I wouldn't say exactly many years, but I've been, you know, caught in patterns as well. And the idea, at least according to how Dr. Pollack tried to frame things along like a timeline, was that initially you would have a big strain and your sodium potassium levels climb up and you have that adrenal response. And that's the fast oxidizer, supposed to have good energy and their rapid heart rate, these sort of things. Then the sodium potassium gets inverted, so the sodium drops, the potassium stays elevated. Those are the first signs that the strain is continuing and the body's struggling to meet that strain, and so it was resisting the strain. As it does that, if it can't keep up, the potassium starts to rise, the sodium falls, one or the other, maybe both at the same time. And you get that resistance pattern. You'll see the calcium climb up when that happens. And then as that calcium climbs up, like that's not a great place. We usually start to classify them in the general adaptation syndrome of Dr. Hans Selye as like exhaustion. They're people that are been prolonged experience of strain, And that prolonged strain is going to start to have effects on their organs and other things. So their stomach starts to ulcer, their GI tract, their adrenal not only their function, but the size of their adrenal gland starts to get smaller. Their kidney shape can get smaller, and their liver size might inflame even to make up, to do more things. So the body's trying to compensate. And as we're moving along these oxidation types on hair tests, these things are actually still relevant. So the slow oxidizer element has some challenges. When we say they have low thyroid function, it can be because the glands themselves might have not been able to keep up. They could have shrunk or atrophied. They might have expanded to try and meet the demand. A lot of different things can happen. So the four lows, normally the way that if you follow the general adaptation syndrome and the way that's charted, the four low ends up like in a really not a great spot. It's like kind of at the end stages of low function organs. The glands aren't able to keep up. There's a lot of compensations. It's usually not a very healthy place. But like Rhonda even just said, I'm in four lows for 6 years. 6 years since the first one. Still have plenty of energy. So it's not, that's what I'm trying to say. It's not always clear cut like that. When we follow the adaptation syndromes, four lows is supposed to be this really depleted spot, but it's not always. So I think that there's an area and some reasons why people end up in four lows that doesn't follow that normal adaptation of like alarm resistance and exhaustion. And four lows, I think what I'm coming to nowadays is like, I think that they have a lot of acids in their body, and I think that the acids are grabbing onto a lot of alkaline elements and probably pulling them out. That's one way I've been looking at it recently. By recently, I don't know how long I've been looking at it like that for, but it brings forth this idea that like Dr. Eck, and also Dr. Eck eventually turned over and changed his mind on, which is that hey, they do need a lot of calcium and magnesium. But even to the benefit of Dr. Wilson, when he was saying, hey, we need to make sure that we have high amounts of calcium and magnesium. Well, he said paramin, but he would recommend higher CalMag, boron to those four low patterns. And I think that one of the benefits from that is more of like I wouldn't say a remineralization therapy, but because that's not really what electrolyte therapy is. It's more about bringing alkaline elements to move through the body. Whether they're absorbed or not is a different conversation altogether. But I think just the mere presence of calcium coming in and moving through the GI tract throughout a day can help the body with the acid alkaline balance. Just by having something that's a bit more alkaline around can have benefit. So I get two questions. Is three lows considered like four lows? Yeah, it's an abnormal pattern, especially in the sense where it's an underproduction of not only adrenal function, but also their sympathetic glands don't seem to be highly active. So it's almost like a reserve state or conservation state. They're not as metabolically active. That's the phrase we use. I think oxalic acid, and mercury are blocking absorption. Well, absolutely. Oxalic acid is known to bind to calcium and magnesium, especially, right? So it can play into that idea, Rhonda, where even oxalic acid still acid, you know. Interestingly, almost all foods to some degree are acid, regardless of what people say, because if they contain vitamins, those vitamins like ascorbic acid, folic acid, right, like they're acids or they're salts, one or the other. But there's a lot of acids in foods. Not that that's a bad thing, but we need to make sure we have these alkaline reserves to meet the demands, or even let alone food exposure to oxalate. We might even have the reserves to meet just our own internal metabolic processes and the acid produced from that. And mercury blocking absorption. Yeah, I mean, it gets challenging, right, with toxic metals, because toxic metals by definition can, like mercury, can impact the thyroid. And if the thyroid function diminishes, and thyroid is a really important endocrine gland, like it's probably close to one of the central glands, like adrenal thyroid, right? That's why we use them on the hair test. If you're gonna have like something like mercury coming into the picture, then you know that's gonna antagonize the thyroid, which can have so many more like down off-stream effects. So when the thyroid function gets a little bit lower, then you know that the pancreas isn't going to be able to produce enough, pancreatin, and that's going to have a systemic effect on digestion. So, you know what they say, the snowball just, gets bigger. So the toxins, absolutely, they can cause some issues. The challenge is at some point, if we don't keep finding mercury, then is that always the thing that's still causing something like four lows? I don't know in your situation, but heavy metals certainly really make things a lot harder when it comes to health and health balancing. Yeah, and in some ways, the toxic metals, like you might get an underfunction of, just for example, say mercury and thyroid with lower thyroid function, but your body still needs, thyroxine in the ovaries to make progesterone. So if you have low thyroid function, then you can end up with like a hormonal imbalance somewhere else, and that can have other effects, right? So now, because there's not as much progesterone being produced in the ovaries, and you can say, well, maybe estrogen and testosterone a bit higher, relatively speaking, you can create stories to get all the way into estrogen, dominance just from mercury exposure, and that's one entry point. You can come in all these different ways. Hey, Rebecca, so many deficient in calcium, so many fear it. Yeah, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die, we all want to get the benefits of things, but we're a bit afraid sometimes to go through to the whole experience. Calcium is one of those ones where even if you're afraid of it, there still is other alkaline substances that can be used if this is the situation of a four lows, right? I'm not saying that it definitely is, but I think it's a part of the conversation, undeniably. And if you, for example, have four lows, I've seen people get out of four lows without using calcium supplements, or they might have used diet, but it's not always a given that it's coming a calcium supplement, for example. I've seen people use it with like magnesium, even though that might have other negative effects, but magnesium still is an alkaline salt and it can still do it, especially in really high doses. A lot of people go really hard with the potassium, I see, and I use a lot of potassium as well. Probably been getting more and more into potassium use just out of the struggle of clients, really, their day-to-day experiences. It's just easier to supplement than it is for food. Even though I'm like a whole foodist at heart, at least I believe in the ideology, in practice it doesn't seem to land as easy. So calcium in the diet, if you can't get it from dairy, it becomes supplement primarily, because otherwise you start coming in conversation oxalic acids and stuff. It's just easier to supplement with bone or something, just hydroxyapatite or another thing like that. I think the real challenge, and this is one of the ideas I've been playing with, was about, especially with that acids, is that those individuals, especially if they have low chronic health, they have chronic health challenges, those individuals will need to often need more protein. I started like blabbering about protein. I didn't know anyone was here when I was doing it. But our protein needs go up, especially as our glandular function starts to diminish. And we can get in this real challenging area where we need to increase protein, which is with it's going to come a whole bunch of acids, just they're made up of amino acids, right? And then those individuals that also need the more protein simultaneously need some of these alkaline substances that they seem to not have a reserve for either. And that's the real challenge I found in four lows, where they need more protein. More protein causes like increased ammonia, or maybe a kidney strain of some kind, or it increases the need for more of these alkaline reserve elements. And they kind of get in this struggle with the balance of that. Yeah, so that's how I think that's what I've been finding is four lows is that kind of dichotomy, that challenge that has come up, and let alone the weirdness of, you know, the weirdness of how some people can just be doing pretty good health wise and other people are very far from there within one pattern, you know. All right. I don't. I want to make sure I didn't miss something. So, Lisa, what's the difference between 4 lows and 3 lows with 1 high? It's basically that. So 4 lows is just you have the calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium, and there's a black line on an ARL test. If it's lower than that, if 3 of them are low, then it's 3 lows. You might have calcium high, the rest low. It's 3 lows, right? It could be high potassium, the other 3 low. We often address the patterns the same as 4 lows, though, because we often will perceive that as like a loss element or maybe a dominance, or like the body might be compensating, but it's generally a similar function as the 4 low pattern. Can you give some info on K2? I feel it's necessary to supplement. I find with low calcium, don't do well with it. I really try not to use Ks, especially with the lower calcium individuals. I do in Australia, it makes its way in just out of the way products are formulated here. So I've had a lot of examples of like with K2, without K2, very similar nutritional intake, at least supplementally. Dietary factors and everything are dramatically different usually. Too hard to control all variables, and hey, that's just a downfall of working practically. Every, you know, way of researching has its limitations. This is when we work practically, we have them. I find the K2, honestly, I don't think we, and when I say we, like just scientists in general, understand how much K2 we actually need and if we actually need to supplement more. I think I've seen people benefit from it, but I don't want to say that's not, you know, it doesn't have a benefit just because you can produce it, because that, you know, we can do that with B12 or other things, right? Still benefit just because we can make it. But we don't know how much like a healthy gut can produce of, say, K2. And if it's needed to take more, or like what an RDA or any kind of reference point. And so because that's not there, that's where I have challenge in with K2. I've seen people use it in high calciums and it seems to be effective to lower their, say, calcium. But it doesn't seem to work well if somebody's still like hypothyroid. You can still give them K2 and it doesn't fix their thyroid issues. So their calcification, their low adrenal function, like that stuff doesn't seem to change. They still, you know, have the constipation. Yeah. Does 3 low pattern requires much paramin as 4 low? I think most people should be mindful about how much nutrients they get into their diet, just in general. And with saying that, it's not an exception if you're in a certain pattern or not. You still need to know what's going in, what we're doing with it, and what's leaving the body to do a proper understanding of nutrition. Because we're looking at like, what are we holding on to? If we don't have enough coming in, it makes it really hard to ensure that, hey, we're building up things or even addressing certain things. So I saw that, honestly, like if you can get reasonable calcium intakes from diet, you might still need a bit of paramin or something, but consider that like our dietary intakes do need to be hitting a certain amount regardless of if we are in a pattern or not. People still need calcium, people still need magnesium, like we still have these needs for nutrients. It's just certain patterns have higher needs for them than others, and some people might need more than others. Like if like a textbook standard person, whatever that might be, the normie, you know, like the most average person ever, if their amount of calcium in their body was like 4 pounds and you were to measure someone else and they have 8 pounds of calcium in them, you could just say, hey, they might be a bit more of a calciferic person. Like they might just need a bit more calcium, or they might have higher requirements, or they might have been a bigger person or something, right? They still need it. To a degree, we'd probably all need like that 4 pound example, but some people are at an 8 pound thing and they just do need more. And that's an individual thing that's really hard for practitioners to figure out. I think that's like something each individual needs to kind of tune into. Yeah. Have you worked with type 1 diabetics? Those changes. I actually haven't really worked with many type 1 diabetics. I actually don't even know if I've worked with any, which is surprising, I think, but I don't think I have. I've read a lot about it. Um, I know minerals and toxic metals definitely play a role, but I haven't worked with it, Rochelle, so I'm not 100% with type 1 diabetics. I think, yeah, it gets challenging with some genetic imbalances, and sometimes I think people lean into genetics, and it might have been caused by something else, and then the scapegoat becomes the genetic story. Um, I had a client who needed 1,500 milligrams of calcium a day, and that wasn't enough combined with food. His next HTMA came back, and he was loaded with cadmium. Cadmium drastically displaces calcium, and our needs are always different. Just can't sometimes see what people have under the hood. Honestly, yeah, I mean, there's been times when I've taken 3,000, 4,000 milligrams of calcium, like I was supplement and drinking a lot of milk and dairy products, um, and I had low calcium and even a high potassium and other things that normally you would think you need more calcium for. Um, yeah, I think that's exactly the point I'm trying to say, Rebecca. Is like, yeah, sometimes we just need more, and it might be temporary. I think that's a point that you're also putting in there. Is that like I don't take 3,000 milligrams of calcium today. I take probably, well, supplementally maybe 900 or something, and then I do diet on top, right? But my needs change as time changes as well. And it's like everybody else. At one point, I needed a lot of adrenal support when I could barely get out of bed, and now I don't use anywhere near like what I used to, you know. Kiri's got a question for a friend. Ask him if low copper, manganese, and iron together on HTMA is a sign of mitochondrial dysfunction. I got that from some people in groups, but have not learned it from HTMA course. On it, absolutely. Mitochondrial function, I mean, depending how you want to look at that stuff, you need trace elements to create energy, whether it's our human aspects of creating energy or our mitochondrial aspect. Like, to be honest, the one within the same thing to a degree, just depends on your philosophy on how that convergence happened. But if you're going to be talking about iron and manganese and copper, absolutely, especially because like there's the electron transport chain, which is really important with copper, and manganese. And then when you have manganese excess, especially, the mitochondria seems to overproduce energy to a point where it starts to increase the requirements of the cells for to keep that drive of energy production going. I know that at least with manganese like stimulates the mitochondria to keep making energy more and more and more, and that increases even like copper needs and iron needs and other things. And it certainly can get weird on an HTMA, about all of those. But absolutely, I'll just say it like that. Like if you see a high iron, especially on a hair test, don't discount a mitochondrial imbalance. I mean, usually, I'm not, when I say that, I don't mean like a genetic mitochondrial thing. I think like if you see a high iron and it's not because, they've been doing something weird on their hair, like henna or something, usually you're going to find that they have some sort of energy imbalance, but it's not normally like a deficit. Usually they're overproducing and they're almost like a slave to the energy production, where they have a lot of fatigue, but they can't seem to get out of that fatigue. It's because it's so inefficient. It creates a lot of heat and a lot of oxidative stress that then increases like CoQ10 requirements and vitamin E and like other things like this. And so it's just like inefficient. Like making energy faster is not better. If you can't make it effectively, it's just not better. That's the situation. You start to lose stuff to entropy, basically, in heat production. Now, seeing all low of those elements now, like, because that's the other side of this coin, Carrie, is we often find really low levels of like manganese and iron and things like this on the hair. I don't like to just jump on those if we see them, but I like to keep an eye on them because I find that initially we see really low levels of copper and manganese, iron. Copper under 1 is like a good example. It's just often like that for a lot of people. And then when you once like the metabolic health starts to improve, maybe you address like their thyroid function, the glandular health starts to improve, what you'll find is often those like really low copper, manganese, iron patterns, which are really common in hair testing. They just like shoot up, and you'll see sometimes people with like their manganese will like go off the chart or like really really high. Like probably one person can have more manganese than everybody in this room. You know, like it's like a huge increase sometimes. And like, is there mitochondrial dysfunction in those? Absolutely, but we don't always see it on like the first test, second test. But if you see those consistently low, usually you'll find that carry. Hopefully that answers your question, but you'll find that it's low, and then often they end up being really high later. Do you think the problem with cellular calcification is a problem of inflammation and not of high calcium intake? I think that there's more than one cause to things. I think some people might have a dominance where they just eat a whole lot of calcium, and eventually it's just too much. You know, I think that can be a situation. But when it comes to like the calcification, especially like the textbook, like high sodium, high calcium, low potassium situation, right? When you're seeing those patterns, which ARL would say a slow oxidizer, at TI at like a slow 1 pattern is usually what you'll find. On those, usually like cellular calcification is like, it's like a late stage thing. You know, like, is there a problem with inflammation? Yeah, probably like years ago, and it's probably still there, but the body's trying to compensate this whole time and slow down things and adjust and, you know, compensate to a point where like sometimes you'll test people with this even in slow oxidation patterns, like really slow ones, and like their CRP, for example, would just be like nothing. There's no inflammation there, you know, like all of their bloods look pretty good. But then when you talk to the person and like visually, they even look inflamed, you know, like there's, yeah. So when I think if I see someone that has like if you have a calcium like 400 or something, like, is it a problem with inflammation? It's like, it's such a late stage thing in that, in like how the body got there, that like, yeah, of course inflammation is there, but there's a lot of other things that are there too, right? You could say, is the problem constipation? Is the problem that, you know, they have electrolyte imbalances? Like, absolutely, for all of those. Do they need more protein? Yes, of course they do, because they can't create energy properly if they have slow metabolic patterns. They need more protein and carbs to activate the Krebs cycle. So like there's a lot of different nuance to how they get there, but someone in slow 1, like, it's a very late stage, so like trying to correct it with a K2 or something, it's like, on paper it sounds good, but in practice it's a different situation, you know. It's like when they create type 2 diabetes models, you know, and they make a mouse be type 2 diabetic in like a week. That's not the same as somebody that's been type 2 diabetes for 40 years, you know, like struggling and like having poor circulation and all of these things. Like, they're different situations. And like insulin doesn't just fix that. Yeah, so hopefully that's clear. If it's not, I'll need to make it more clear one day. I'm working on it. But Celier's work was pretty clear. By the time you get to like the exhaustion stage, which is the calcification you're referring to, you know, there's organ atrophy at that point. There's lesions in the intestines, so like you're not absorbing food well. It's just the way it is, and I don't mean it to be like fear mongering or people are in these patterns. Like, I was in these patterns too, you know. It's not like I'm the exception to this. We're all part of it. Yeah. Is 4 lows going to on a retest like a reason for concern? No, I mean, the 4 lows can be a really good thing. 4 lows, if you consider that our body's trying to utilize and retain a lot of minerals, and if they're not in the hair, you can, you know, think about how the body might not be putting that stuff in the hair because there's nothing to waste. The body's actively using things, and so you're looking in the trash bin and there's no trash because like we're eating all the food, you know. This is not much waste. The four lows pattern on a retest can be really good. It can also be, not a great situation, but I think that's where context is, needs to be considered. It's not all about a good or a bad thing, because when we're doing hair testing, we're looking at like phases that we're going through, and we're always looking back into history and seeing, okay, with all of these emergent things that happened, this is where I was, this is what I'm going to do to kind of adjust and change that course of that, whatever is going. I don't think four lows is just bad. I think like if you chronically have four lows and then you have high heavy metals and stuff, like it's not a great situation. But I wouldn't say like it's, you should always look at any of the patterns as like bad. I've retested and gotten slower and slower oxidation for like a year and a half when I was first starting. Every test just worse. Calcium worse, calcium worse. Oh great, my potassium's lower. Like it just kept getting worse, worse, worse. I was feeling slight improvements. Actually, sometimes I felt way worse, even myself. I just felt terrible going through some of these things. And then it started changing. I ended up in four lows. I was like, oh good, I'm finally not in slow one. Same old pattern like I always was. It's not a better situation. That's a conversation to see where we are on our journey. Absolutely. A lot of cool things we can do at home to check in on things too. You don't always have to rely on a doctor, or it's great to check in with doctors. Don't just don't avoid a doctor if you don't. You know, what we want to do is educate people on how to understand what's going on with their health, and if there is some things or challenges that they're going through, how can they double check that things are right? Even with hair testing or even other philosophies in natural medicine, you should be able to check in on things and see, you shouldn't rely on one test, right? So one common one, like for example, if you're talking about like four lows and getting stuck in four lows, because I see you put some stuff up there, Salda. I see your comments, your questions. If you keep having these things and you're not sure and you're like waiting every 3 months just to get disappointed by a hair test, like that's not a great place to be in, or even a great perspective on it. There are other things you can do right at home, like you can check your body temperature, you can check your pulse, you can get your adrenal function insights by looking at blood pressure. And sometimes you don't see the test move in the right direction and you just feel worse, but you might find if you start looking at some things going in the right direction, and that can be very empowering when you start to catch on to those things. Absolutely. Thoughts on children born with four lows? I see lots of kids in four lows, like almost nowadays, like they're like three lows with a high potassium is kind of a standard for a young kid these days. Unfortunately, yeah. A lot of them aren't even getting milk growing up, right? They get soy milk or something. I don't even know what they put in that stuff these days. Like, it's tough. Lots of kids with low zinc status as well. That's really challenging because they don't really like to eat the quantities of things that they should be as well. Yeah, kids are. I like working with kids, but it can be really challenging as well. Because it's a kid's life, and anything that can improve function to like their glandular health can have dramatic effects later in their life. Like if you grow up hypothyroid and develop hypothyroid, your brain function is not going to be the same as if you addressed a thyroid issue when you were young. Like it's just not that way. So I think kids, like, it's a very powerful way if you can get on top and really support them. I think Melvin Page's measurements are probably most relevant for kids, even where you can, as I showed you, you can see like, oh, let's have a look at mine. I'll share it. I don't mind. You can measure me later. Double check my work. Let's see. This is what it is. Oh, this is how I've tracked it. Estrogen, testosterone here. So I did my both sides of my body, red for right and left, and according to this, it looks like I have a little bit of a low functioning pituitary function, which, you know what, I'm a very short guy. I probably didn't have a good pituitary function to develop my bones. I didn't know that until like age 30. So like that's not gonna help me change my body shape or my size or anything now. But for a kid, that could be like that short kid that like just had grew up with a history of hypothyroid because their mom and their mom and everyone was hypothyroid. Has a chance of just like reaching a potential that maybe the lineage hadn't even considered. I think it's important stuff. Yeah, almond milk. Yeah, good old almond. Phytic acid just really helps us get that zinc in. Absolutely. Any thoughts on CalMag 3.4, low NAK, and low zinc to copper? Uh, yeah, that's like an exhaustion pattern, dude. That's like low. I don't know about the levels themselves. I probably could deduce it if I had more time. But 3.4 CalMag is not bad at all by any means. Because there's a low NAK ratio, you probably could look at exhaustion stage of stress at that point. Maybe in resistant stage of stress. I don't know for sure. I haven't seen the test. But with a zinc copper like that, yeah, there's probably some fatigue. Hey, that's a copper dominant pattern by definition. It's an interesting one, really. If you have the high copper, interestingly, I think this is interesting. If you compare the symptoms of people with very overactive pituitary function and the symptoms of people that display a lot of copper excess traits, the emails that are 10 pages long, the explanations that are just way more than necessary, you'll find a lot of correlation with the pituitary function. And I think what happens is a lot of people are stressed, so their pituitary is being activated over chronic strain, so pituitary can get tired, right? In a world where the thyroid is so important, your pituitary is like the fallback. It's like, oh, the thyroid's struggling, I'm going to work my way and I'm going to get it going and try and make it meet the demands, right? As you go along these stages of strain, these stages of stress, however you want to look at them, the fast oxidizer has like an overactive pituitary because they're in an alarm stage of stress. The slow oxidizer has an overactive pituitary because their thyroid function's diminished. Their pituitary is going over and over and over, to try and make up for that low thyroid function. And so, how am I getting to this? Well, nobody's asking. I'll ask it because when we find people with copper excess, they're in this very stressed state and they respond as if they're in a fight or flight situation a lot of the time, and that pituitary is really, really going. We in HTMA talk about the copper doing stuff like that, but copper's more in like the hypothalamus, that like diencephalon back at the brain area. When the pituitary can't keep up, the hypothalamus has to kick in. And like that's very late stage compensations. That's like dad's coming, he's gonna figure this problem out, we couldn't do it kind of situation. We got to call the big boy, and the hypothalamus gets involved. Oh boy, not fun. So with the copper imbalance like that, yeah, Todd, that there's definitely fatigue there, low sodium potassium, you're gonna find it anyway. There's a lot of different perspectives on addressing that pattern. Some people would use copper, other people wouldn't. Yeah, an interesting thing. I think copper excess is I think it's an important thing for people to understand, but I think a lot of people are kind of get, I think they look at it as if it's fact a lot of the time that like copper is causing the slow oxidation or estrogen dominance and stuff, and it probably is. But I think we're looking at copper as if it's like the bad guy, and I really don't think it is. I think it's just like the one that was like caught trying to help out, and now it's the one that's there the most, and it just looks bad on copper. I think copper is a very important element, but when it's out of balance, fatigue is definitely there. Yeah. So I've been looking at like that Melvin Page things with the bones, and when I'm looking at pituitary function lately, I've been using a lot of pituitary supplements with myself, with others, to experiment with that. Thyroid complex from Endomet. You know, they have pituitary gland in there, and everyone uses it as a thyroid glandular, but and it is a thyroid glandular. But I've had people use that product and then use like a different glandular that's available online, and it's not always the same. Some people have even better results when they use the Endomet one, and I couldn't figure out what that was until I started to explore this thyroid pituitary situation. And that's been a really obvious thing nowadays, now that I've been seeing pituitary definitely needed to support people. And then most women, if they need thyroid glandulars and they're doing really well with those, oftentimes it's a good time to consider looking at the pituitary or even some ovary support. Be mindful though, if the copper's high, they might not need the ovary part because the copper can do the estrogen stuff, right? Get a little bit nuanced, but have you had patients that tolerate no magnesium? Yeah, that's honestly, magnesium can be very tough for some people. They take it and they get really tired, or it might cause a lot of electrolyte imbalances with them. It's not necessarily like I always have a solution, but I do know that a lot of the times when people are just really struggling with like magnesium, usually they're quite fatigued anyway, or they have some symptomatology of fatigue. And then usually those individuals we find do need to look at a little bit of vitamin therapy often in the beginning to help a little bit. I like to use a bit of vitamin B1, but that can be like my personal favorite way is like I use a B complex together. I don't like to just vitamin B1, but people that are really struggling with magnesium, I do like to tease in a little bit of B vitamins just to see if that helps, and a lot of the time it does help with their intolerance to magnesium. Yeah, we don't tolerate magnesium since Lyme. It's tough, you know. Infections in general, like, they change our metabolic environment, and it can make things really tough. When we say we don't tolerate something, though, is that like we don't feel good on it? Because that's very different than like an allergy or like some obvious challenge with the product. Yeah, not tolerating magnesium, like, because toleration is like, you can unpack that. I couldn't tolerate healing because it made me change. I couldn't tolerate going to the gym because I didn't want to put in the effort there. You know, I wanted to sleep in. I don't know. Tolerate. You got to like qualify tolerate what that means. And is it all the time? Is it some of the time? You know. I didn't see a question about. I only get like 3 or something, Rhonda. I can't see them all. Was there one on Oligoscan? Lyme has increased heart palpitations. Nah. Heart palpitations can have many different causes. The electrolyte imbalances, you know, but like I found a lot of bone and joint related issues with it, which is common as well in Lyme, because the Bartonella and Babesia really like to eat the nutrients for those connective tissues. How do you address sensitivity to supplements in general? With mag, I meant causing race. Okay. I don't do very well when people are really struggle with sensitivity to supplements, if I'm 100%. I think a good way of looking at it is like seeing if there's a lot of noise going on and like trying to control variables so that we can see in broad strokes the things that need to be there or not there. Try to get rid of disturbing factors, things that might be impacting in negative ways, and just trying to get a clear picture. And I find that just finding that clear picture is hard enough. But once they start to do that, some broad strokes get figured out where usually there's entry points that you can work on, or at least at smaller intakes. I have found some glandular support just absolutely needed though. If you're struggling with magnesium, you might want to also just double check kidney function and make sure that there's no problems with kidney function. Yeah. HTMA underestimates heavy metals. I don't know if it underestimates, but you just don't see them because it's just not there. But interpretation might be underestimated, absolutely. So oligoscan, urinary stool, DMS. I think they DMSA challenge. I think all those have use. I don't use them, but I think they do have use. So I'm happy to learn about those and how that works. I've tested some people's stuff, but I haven't seen. I don't do it standard. Magnesium gives me anxiety. Paramin doesn't. I find the CalMag just works beautiful together. I feel like the boron really does make a difference. Um, I can't eat more due to bad digestion. I don't think it's always that we have to eat more, June. Sometimes, like taking a break, really important. Slowing down. A lot of people, their livers like struggling, and eating more can just add to the burden, increase ammonia, cause some kidney stress. Deal with it. Yeah, it's sometimes some breaks or slowing down or just listening to the body is needed. I don't think science knows all of the stuff when it comes to like how much protein and fat stuff you need all the time. Um, if you're really sensitive, sometimes just trying not to add in stuff all the time, I think is a good place to be. The chat just like things are flying by really fast. Sorry, I'm a little distracted. My thoughts changed over time. Any kidney tips? I was doing stretching. I had a lot of thoughts change over time. Like it's unreal. When I look at it, really, the fact that I use RDA dosing as a baseline for general things is not even a real consideration in modern MB, whatever you call that. A lot of different things over time. I think I'm a little bit so far away. I have no idea how that my difference in opinion on some of this stuff is. Any kidney tips? Recently, I started doing twisting stretches. So much sedimentation. You going into like a jar or something, put it into light, having a look at the waxies or like that kind of stuff, William. Really cool to do that. There was a time when I exclusively peed in jugs and jars. Don't want to, flex my my nerdiness at looking at waste fluids. Thinking of trying Chanca. I imagine this Chanca Piedra. Chanca Piedra is beautiful. Her Cat's Claw is fantastic. Padarco, Lapacho, beautiful as well. With kidney itself, I mean, I really like juniper berries. Love juniper berries. Like, maybe it's just some ancestral thing for me. Juniper berries are so great. I really like that kidney formula from Dr. Christopher's Originals. That one is it works really well. Yeah, it's got a nice little blend in there, golden seal and stuff. It's really good. What do you think about high free serum copper? Like it's an element that can cause a lot of challenges when it's not bound to proteins, and if it's high, it can cause some challenges. Honestly, June. The primary goal that we try to do is to have things that binds to it or encourage that elimination. So if it is high, look, it's most likely going to cause some estrogen dominant symptoms. Whether or not you need to explore the other sides of that is very individual, because there's a lot of chaos of like digestive stuff, and then obviously you're having a hard time eating more things, and then to have higher copper, the higher copper can even cause you to not want to eat, and like mess with the nervous system a little bit. You see that even in anorexia, and the research is quite clear on it too, is like they have higher copper status, and then if you talk to people that even have like these eating disorders, like they're just genuinely not hungry. Like they're just not, they can't, they don't, there's no more food that they want to eat because they're just not hungry, right? And they often have the higher copper. So I think sometimes it can all kind of come together. But if you have high serum copper, you would have to look at the whole picture, really. Look at the gut. When I say look at the gut, it would be like, look at what we're absorbing. And if we're having a hard time translating what's going into some sort of absorption factor. Hair testing, you need like selenium or stuff, but you can't really do too much with a hair test for absorption of what's changing because we don't always see all of that. When the copper is elevated and you know you're having digestive issues, I really like to look at the organic acid test. I think it can give us a lot of insight. The HVA to the VMA ratio can give us some insight. I find a lot of people having challenges with B6 that start to have the serum copper issues as well. Not always. The more you're testing, the more you're going to find, and then the more complex it gets, and then sometimes you just redundant excess, testing, you just find more and more things. But yeah, high free serum copper. I mean, is it a protein related issue as well? Would be an idea. June. Program is taking 3 zinc a day. Can I get? Yeah, you can. Technically, taking more than 50 milligrams of zinc ongoing for it depends on the individual and how long, but usually the rule is like 3 months over 50 milligrams can create copper deficits that can be measured, not just from hair tests but from other things. Now when I say that, I've taken high zinc 3 times a day, 4 times a day. I've seen a lot of other people do it. I think the thing to be careful with, and I unlearned, I don't know how Dr. Wilson really pushes a lot of zinc, and we ended up recommending a lot of zinc to people. These days I kind of pull back a little bit. I do end up on like 7,500 milligrams sometimes, but I'm usually trying to keep it down to like 50, around there. And I think it's important to not be afraid of using copper, but it certainly can be a challenge, because if you take more zinc and you create an exacerbated copper issue, that's not better than the situation you're already in. It can be the same situation, if not could actually be a little bit worse, because now you've increased the challenge by adding more of an antagonist or something. I don't want to like put any fear in you, but I'd like just to be honest, like taking that many zinc absolutely can cause low copper. Someone like with June's question with high serum copper, even taking 3 zinc could lower, you might find ceruloplasmin lowers in those cases even, and then serum copper goes high. It's just non-protein bound copper. It's not always a good thing. If fat people have sorry, do fat people have more issues supplementing copper since they tend to have higher estrogen? I find the bigger people's body weights, the less challenges they generally have. They seem to be a bit more stable with things, so I don't actually find that. I think it's interesting. I think like people that have higher fat on their body actually need a bit more copper to utilize the fat on their body, but then you start getting into a dietary conversation, and dietary science is like, it's great, but it's not real. Like, it's all done in a lab, and like variables are not realistic, so it just doesn't always translate. But they generally do have higher estrogen. Usually when you test them, they don't have higher estrogen, ironically, paradoxically. I've been looking at those as if they are artifacts, when you look at a microscope and you can see the LED light or whatever light, and it's an artifact on what you're looking. I like to look at it like that a lot of the time, where we can see that like someone that might have a lot of symptomatology and signs for low thyroid, estrogen or something, but when you look at their actual like pathology or something, they don't always show us that. And I still look at that as an artifact, because there's a discrepancy between 2 objective parameters there still, my eyes and experience versus what labs are showing. Is the VMA high in oat when copper is low in serum? I can't answer that one. That one, it's complex, because VMA has to do with dopamine and neurotransmitter function, which is not necessarily in the blood, but it can be. Generally, when you have the VMA imbalances, you're going to have problems with the dopamine. And because you have the problems with the dopamine metabolism, you might have high copper in the blood, because it's not being bound to proteins. I started this whole thing like just chatting about proteins. Proteins are very important for neurotransmitters and stuff, and like enzyme function. Like if you're not getting enough protein, that's like it's not even easy to do. Some people really can't stomach more protein. It's a functional problem a lot of the time. Just because we need it doesn't mean that it's realistic to add more in, kind of situation. I think I might do like a webinar or something on protein. I've been thinking about it. So if you guys think I should, I totally can. I don't know. It's one of those topics on protein. I think is a very important one. Um, 3 months into MB and not seeing any improvement in symptoms, especially fatigue and gut issues. What do you suggest when things aren't shifting? In the three lows, hypothyroid, low cortisol. If you're not seeing any improvements, I reckon like at least get a temperature thing and start checking your temperature. And this is not the best way, but you can at least have a look and go, hey, 36.8. See if it's any good. You might check and go, man, it's 35. Maybe I should look in a couple times a day and see what's going on. And you might find that like your body temps are just nowhere near where you should be. You know, and then like if you're not getting any improvements, it might not be that there's something wrong with your program or anything. It's just we're looking at averages over time. There's things you can do in between to check in, right? You can get like a blood pressure machine. You can put it on there, see what your heart rate's like. If you have hypothyroid and you've been doing support for it, suppose I don't know what you're doing, right? And your pulse is like really low and your temps are low, like maybe explore that and see maybe your practitioner recommended Endocrine. Maybe you do need that. Maybe it's worthwhile looking at a thyroid glandular or something. Like, you talk with your practitioner about it, right? But if you're not seeing a benefit, sometimes you just need to look at in more different areas. It's not all like hair testing is not your only answer. Mineral balancing is like it's honestly it's a really important framework that really could enable a lot of different natural practices, like naturopathy in general, or even herbalism or other things. It's really a framework. It's not meant to be a solution. It just helps us set the stage of understanding where someone is along the stage of stress, what challenges could be coming up as a result, and then clinically you start to explore those things, and they don't always pan out, but a lot of the time they do, and that's why somehow the HTMA stuff, even despite all the science stuff, the poor science that just bashed it, is actually just showing that like people just keep benefiting from it, even if they're applying these things wrongly or not the way that someone says or something. It's so powerful that like the calcium to phosphorus ratio, as that's improving, people's health are getting better. Like we don't, you know what I mean? Just that is just happening. So if you're not getting a benefit, okay, let's just have a look at some of these other things that we can also check, and seeing if just double checking things are going in the right direction, So you can check your pulse, and if you know you're hypothyroid, see if it's improving. If it's not, explore it a little bit. You might need to do something like, I call it a functional thyroid feeding, where I'm not telling you to do this obviously, but this is what, I mention to people to try and learn these things, is they check their pulse, get a baseline, introduce something. Maybe you've already been introduced to this product or something, and then, geez, the chat's going so fast, I'm missing everything. You check your body temps. Hey, hang on, long time no talk. You check your body temps, you see the pulse, wherever that baseline is. You might introduce a glandular. Maybe somebody's recommended you take thyroid complex. I recommend that sometimes, that product. That doesn't mean I know the best dose for you. And for some people, that's like half a tablet in the beginning. For some people, they're on like 6 or 9 of these things a day, right? Like dosing can be dramatically different. You might not need a super high dose, but if you check your pulse, check your body temps, introduce something, check your pulse, check your body throughout the day, try to isolate variables. If things are moving in the right direction, keep entertaining it, because it's going to be 3-4 months for a hair test. We don't know what it'll show then. But if you can see, hey, I was doing great on 2 of these, I'm gonna stick around there, and then you might stay there for a little bit. You might find 2 is eventually too much for you. You gotta drop down. You can check your pulse. These are things you can get at home. Look, you can even like check your bloody iron test at home. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing for these things, you know. Uh, oh, I just pushed a button. I don't know if I messed something up. Oh well, we'll see. We'll call it a day soon anyway. Alrighty. Sorry, I closed all these questions. Is the thyroid glandular? You mentioned armor. No, it's just a gland that you can get on the internet, the best place to get things for your health, because that's the kind of life we live these days. Like a thyroid glandular. So what I'm referring to specifically is a product called thyroid complex. I don't think I have one here. No, I don't. But it's thyroid complex. There's all sorts of ones. Allergy Research has one. Swanson has one. I don't have favorites really. There's lots of different products. Some people do better on one than the other. Yeah. But then you start doing that, and you might find, hey, I'm a fast oxidizer, and I shouldn't be on thyroid support. But you start checking and functional thyroid feeding and seeing how your body's doing on it. You might find you're doing a lot better. Your blood sugar is a bit more balanced. You're more resilient to stress, and you're on a thyroid glandular. And guess what? Everyone would have overlooked it because, well, you're a fast oxidizer, but you're in 4 lows, right? That's how we got to this conversation. Dr. Watts really helped by having subcategories to open up the field, but the conversation, the phraseologies of just fast and just slow really didn't do us any favors. All right. Yeah, we'll do another one again. I'm trying to figure out some things that we're gonna do. I have I'll probably try and connect with Susan Cachet. I've been trying to do that for a little bit, and then from there we'll do something else, I think. But I've been playing this idea as well as like a protein webinar of some kind. So we'll see what we do. Cool. All right. Any final questions before we get ready to head off today, or? I know I seen Lou put a message there. I totally missed it. It just flung right past. Yeah. Alrighty. Alrighty. Cool. Well, it's nice seeing everybody, and I'm gonna call it a day. Maybe we'll try and get something more regular, or we'll get something else going. If you have some ideas, let us know, because I like chatting with everybody. I just don't know what you guys would like to do. All right. Well, take care. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.